I just, I suppose, start out by thanking the NBC MSO for inviting me to speak on what is an essential and critical topic to access and use in our built environment. Just a bit about myself. I work the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, the Building Standards Advisory Unit, as a Building Standards Advisor, with my key areas of responsibility being parts B, M and K of the building regulations, as well as the building control system. I started out, I suppose, in the public sector, working in Carlow County Fire Rescue Service with Alan. Working principally in the areas of fire prevention and building control, learning a lot off of his extensive experience. We had a fair few arguments and battles together in the built environment, but it always worked well. Before moving on to work with Mairead and the NBC MSO as part of the development deployment of the building control management system and certain modules within it. I joined Dublin Fire Brigade there in 2018 in Senior Executive Fire Prevention Officer role before joining the department in 2020. So Alan has already given a comprehensive and welcome, I suppose, overview to the role that Part M and Technical Guidance Document M plays in the built environment. It is a key element to one of the 12 parts to deliver that sense of equal and equitable access in a reasonable manner in respect of the built environment. Along with Technical Guidance Document B, it is one of the key drivers to what we can term as space layout within the building regulations, that it does have direct impact upon in the internal configuration of buildings, defining key characteristics where applicable, such as door widths, provision of lifts and access, provision of ramps, etc. Okay, that works. I'm just going to pause here for a moment. Is this the V1.1? Okay. I was up late. I was up just reviewing and amending this before I came down this morning. So in terms of this morning and it's, I suppose, the presentation over the next 40 or so minutes, I'd hope to go through the building regulations, the specific provisions setting out how, where and when we would apply Part M, the building regulations itself, the, I suppose, position of the building regulations within the regulatory environment, going a bit into the technical guidance documents, into the building control regulations themselves, the system of administration and control that support the application of the building regulations. And I'll be speaking in a limited extent to the 2022 amendment to Part M and Technical Guidance Document M at the provision of changing places toilets within the built environment. First and foremost, it's useful to I suppose, review the structure and the position in respect of the legislative framework in which we operate. We have two key enablers or drivers behind legislative updates within the built environment, the Building Control Acts and European Union directives delivered through the European Community Acts. Building Control Acts giving provision with respect to the building regulations, the key functional requirements with respect to the built environment, the building control regulations, as I said, the systems of administration and control, and give existence to the building control authorities. The building regulations, and we'll go through it shortly through the upcoming slides, are delivered principally through articles of application, functional requirements, and ultimately the most visible component, the technical guidance documents, providing simple, straightforward, non-complex provisions with respect of health and safety. The building control regulations themselves are systems of administration and control, certificates, applications, and notices, provisions with respect to the appointment of designated roles, the assigned certifiers, nominated builders, all supported through a system of, all supported through a code of practice. And the building control authorities themselves given powers under sections 8 and 11 of the Building Control Act, and 12, in fact, for the service of enforcement notices, provision of high court orders, etc. Supported in no mean feat by a national system and structure, the National Building Control Office, who hosts the Building Control Management System, the IT system for the delivery of the building control. In parallel, and not so much for today's, the focus is very specific to the building regulations, but there are other elements in play delivered through the European Communities Act, as I said, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, delivering through principally through PowerShell for application of energy efficiency in the built environment, but also delivers the requirements for building energy rating certificates and the provision for EV recharging points, what we term the 2025 provision. The provision of materials or placing materials on the market through the CE marking of products that are covered by harmonized standards, and soon to, I suppose, be put into effect the broadband directive provision of IT services within the built environment. To simplify it a little bit, we have the Building Control Act at the head, building regulations, as I said, through provision of its principal articles of application, the functional requirements, the TGDs and the exemptions. And in parallel, the building control regulations, our system of notices, application certificates. It is perhaps a simplistic overview of the system, but important to be reminded that, in effect, the building regulations are the driving requirement, that the building control regulations are there to support them. That is the constructs of fire safety certificates, DACs, commencement notices, and certs of compliance completion. No less important, as they give opportunities to look at designs, to certify designs, to give through notices the ability of local authorities to coordinate and schedule inspections and statutory certification and completion. But the driving objective is that of the building regulations. But the building regulations can exist without the control regs, but the control regs are always subordinate to that of the building regulations. That in the articles of application of SI 496, for example, for commencement notice, it specifies explicitly works to which the building regulations relate. The same for fire safety certificates, works to which Part B relates, Part B of the building regulations, the same for DACs. So over the next few coming slides, I'm going to go back to basics a bit with respect to the articles of application of the building regulations. For me, this is a first port of call for any works that are occurring to determine what exactly are the nature of the works, what is the nature of the requirements of the building regulations. So we go through each of the driving provisions, Article 8, the exemptions, Article 9, the general obligations and provisions with respect of the building regulations, Article 10, the new buildings requirements, Article 11, the extensions of material alterations requirements, which are perhaps amongst for material alteration, the most complicated of the requirements of the building regs, and Article 13, material change of use. Article 12 is in there, it's not forgotten. But it relates to the provision of services, parts G, H, and J, and is again not explicitly relevant to this morning, but they do exist. So starting out, Article 8, exemptions. There does exist in the back of the book, as it were, in the third schedule to SI 497, a list of exemptions to the requirements of the building regulations. And they are listed as classes. There can be alignments, perhaps, to other exemptions. They do look very similar to some of the exemptions under the 2000 Planning and Development Act and the Planning and Development Regulations. There are 14 classes of exempted building to which the requirements of the building regulations do not apply. One of them has been withdrawn. That is the Class 9 exempted building, ESB facilities, was withdrawn under SI 115 of 2006, which brought in at the same time the provisions of Part B of 2006. But for the rest, Article Class 1 through to 14 does outline specific types of works to which the building regulations don't relate. Some of them are more straightforward than others. A national monument, a lighthouse, Others are slightly more complicated and do require a little bit of examination, the likes of a single-story agricultural building. It does have specific characteristics of application. 300 square meters, has to be detached from any other building. But suffice to say that there are exemptions, that where those exemptions apply, what we term as the functional requirements of the building regulations don't apply, that they are fully exempt under Article 8. So for, again, this morning, we're speaking principally to Part M, so M1 through to M5, and where those exemptions apply, the building regs as a direct requirement don't apply. That's not to say that other necessary health requirements in respect of health and safety may not apply to such buildings. So the likes of the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act, the Fire Services Act may still apply in respect of the given buildings. Moving on to Article 9, perhaps one of the most important articles of application of the building regulations. It sets the broad requirements in respect of the second schedule. When I refer to the second schedule, I mean the functional requirements that that would be provided in the introduction to every technical guidance document in the grey box. For Part B, it's B1 through to B5 for a non-dwelling, B6 through to B10, sorry, B11 for dwelling houses. In M, it's M1 through to M5, etc. But broadly, and most importantly, Article 9 specifies that all works have to be carried out in accordance with the requirements as applicable set out in the second schedule. First, you have to meet the requirements of the functional requirements. Second, and of no less importance, you cannot breach any other requirement. So in no one provision takes precedence over another, they all must be met. Sometimes there can be what are perceived to be, shall we call them conflicts, within the building regulations. The existence of the technical guidance documents that we come on to are designed in such a way as to work harmoniously together as a sequence of documents. But there will often be perceived conflicts. For example, in Part K, we try to prevent people falling through windows at the less than 800 millimeters threshold and falling out windows where windows above 1.4 meters above the ground, that there should be a restrictor to prevent individuals falling out a window. Part B for dwellings requires you can get out a window. It must satisfy both. It must be capable of being restricted, but must be capable of being opened. And for that, certain mechanisms are provided. The same can be provided, can be said for Parts B and M. Part B seeks to restrict spread of fire in buildings like walls and doors. Part M, doorways that are open or easy to open is often a key characteristic and objective. They still must work together. The third subclause to Article 9, often again forgotten, but no less important, in fact, a main driving requirement. There can be no new or greater contravention of the requirements of the building regulations carrying out works. This would be more usually applicable in respect of existing buildings, so material alterations, material change of use extensions, but you cannot make a building worse in carrying out works. It supports the general direction of travel and the objective of this progressive improvement of the built stock through the building regulations where they apply. Moving on, I've highlighted for the purpose of this morning, Article 10, that building regulations are set out in the second schedule to apply to new buildings. But Article 9 is also highlighted in that you have to meet the requirements and can't put one over another. And through the through the provisions of application of the second schedule, again, for M1, that adequate provision is made for people to access and use a building. M4, where sanitary facilities are provided, adequate provision should be made for people to access and use changing places toilet, having regard to the size of the building. For extensions, again, Article 9 applies. Certain provisions of Part M would also apply. The provision made for access to approach and access an extension, that where extended and sanitary facilities are being provided, they should be provided for the people in the extension. And in carrying out those works, again, through Article 9, the existing building can't be made worse by the provision of the extension. This applies across the board in respect to the building regs. I've jumped ahead to Article 13, skipping over the provisions of application of material alteration, as material alteration is sometimes one of the most complicated of the provisions of application of the building regulations. That material change of use can often be more straightforward. That for certain works as set out in Article 13 of the building regulations, that the function requirements set out in the second schedule would apply. For the most part, for material changes in use, there's under Article 13.1, the particular parts of the second schedule are set out. So A1, A2, Part B in its entirety, C4, F, G, H, J, and L apply to the building or part of the building undergoing the material change in use. There is a subclause to Article 1A that Part M applies to certain material changes of use set out in paragraph 2, 2B1, 2, 4, 6, 7, and 8. So highlighted in bold on the slide, that Part M specifically applies to the day centre, the hotel, guest building, or institutional building, the place of assembly, the shop, or the shopping centre. But there are other particular changes in use to which Part M does not apply. Article 2A of Article 13 is not called out. So the material change of use, say for where buildings containing flats become used, is not called out in this material change of use characteristic. However, where the works are being carried out, they have to be carried out in accordance with Article 11. So material alterations would apply to the works. And moving on, coming along to the characteristics of material alteration. Material alteration defined slightly differently under the building regulations than the building control regulations. So material alterations, any works carried out by themselves, which carry a requirement under parts A, B, or M, are deemed material alteration for the purpose of the building regs. But those material alterations, but only the alterations, have to comply with the requirements of the building regulations up until the point where no new or greater contravention is created. And it's this, if we may pause for a moment, is the big change and difference between the foregoing provisions. For a new building, the building drives the works. If there's a requirement set out under those functional requirements, they're applicable throughout the building. The same for an extension, the building regulations apply to the extension and to ensure that no new or greater contravention occurs. In material change of use, they apply to the material change of use. We're not picking bits of the building that apply, it's just their use. But in material alterations, it's the works drive the requirement. So if it's the wall, it's the wall. And as long as there's no new greater contravention, it's limited to that of the wall. That's the nature of material alteration. In 2018, as part of the then programme for provision of housing, Rebuilding Ireland, now a place for housing for all, a document was published called Bringing Back Homes. This document was designed to clarify the requirements, a myriad of regulatory and legislative requirements pertaining to a change of use, from planning and building control and fire safety. It provided guidance with respect to the provision of notices, gave key examples of simple changes in use, and provided information with respect of state supports relating to reuse. However, contained within it, especially in the appendices, is perhaps one of the most detailed examinations of the requirements of the building regulations with respect to existing buildings. That the provisions of a material alteration and material change of use were set out in detail in that document and continue to apply even through to today, that they have not changed. Try to use clear examples that for the change of use where a building containing flats becomes so used, Part M does not apply because this is not listed under Article 13.1a, went through it a few moments ago. But in carrying out those works, some parts of the building may have a Part M requirement, and it's those parts of the building have to conform to Part M. If there's an open plan office being changed to use as flats, there wouldn't have to be necessary construction of common corridor spaces and access points. If they carry a Part M requirement, those parts would apply, but there's no driving requirement for, say, other works in the building. That Part M, for example, does not impose requirements to upgrade the approach route to the building or to provide a passenger lift. But if the approach route is upgraded, or if a lift is provided, it by itself must conform to the requirements of Part M. We will speak to the provisions of functional requirements. They're very high level statements of performance and requirements in respect to the building regulations. Adequacy of means of access or means of egress or means of exhausting products of combustion, but by themselves would lead to a difference of application across the state or difference of interpretation. So to support the building regulations, the function, what I may term as the function requirements, a suite of technical guidance documents are published that by themselves provide prima facie compliance to the building regulations, designed to work as a harmonious set of 12 that where one is updated, takes account of the other 11 to ensure that there is conformity across the range of them. In respect of the provisions, where works are carried out in accordance with the TGD, it indicates compliance with Part M. They're written in a straightforward non-legal language. Again, the building regulations, the functional requirements are schedules to a statutory instrument, their legal text. The TGDs are written in non-legal language for simplicity and to allow them to be readily understood. Designed principally for simple, non-complex buildings. They do offer specific guidance, depending on the specific technical guidance document in relation to non-complex buildings, but also refer to different and appropriate codes and standards which may assist in meeting the requirements. They should be applicable in the vast majority of cases. I'm not going to go into the technical guidance documents of their broad application and various interpretations. There's a range of speakers coming after me this morning that will be going to it in a lot more detail, just to set, I suppose, the position of the TGDs in the regulatory environment. But from a high level point of view, and again, Alan set it out in his opening address, that there are specific objectives underpinning the requirements of the building regs. That new buildings are accessible and usable, that extensions to buildings are, where practicable, accessible and useful. Material alterations increase the accessibility. So again, the slow progressive improvement of the built stock. Certain changes of use are made accessible and usable where practicable, and there are practicability clauses within the technical guidance document, and new dwellings are visitable. Well, I'm not going to go into the broad provisions of the TGD in detail. As I said, there's a fair few presentations to follow. I will go into a little bit of detail with respect of the 2022 amendment to technical guidance document and the latest update to the Part M of the second schedule to the building regulations, and some consequential amendments and updates to the building regulations themselves, as well as to the technical guidance document. Driven primarily to increase accessibility and usability in the built environment for all persons, a provision was introduced into the TGD for a changing places toilet. That provision, or the definition of such a facility, is actually enshrined in the building regulations themselves in its definitions. So the definitions of the regs were modified and updated to provide a clear, consistent definition within the driving statutory instruments in respect of a CP toilet. As it is so defined in the building regulations, it should allow universal interpretation application of the requirements, but in essence is sanitary accommodation provided in addition to that already necessary in a building, including in addition to a standard accessible water closet, for persons who need additional space and facilities in the building, who may need assistance to use the facilities. Parts M1 to M4, as they previously existed from 2010 through to 2022, were updated to include the new M4 for changing places toilet and to retain the provision for the non-application of Part M to dwellings, except where new dwellings created. They provide that where a sanitary facility is provided in a building, that is, a building is to be built or extended or undergoing certain changes of use, having regard to the building use and size, that a changing places toilet should be provided in the building. But again, it's important to reiterate and understand the position of the technical guidance document in the built environment, that Part M by itself, or TGD M, does not drive the provision for sanitary facilities in general. That is driven by other requirements. Part G will specify the approach and application for the scale of provision of sanitary facilities, but Part M does not create a requirement. It creates a requirement for the accessible facilities to be provided if sanitary facilities are being provided. It's important to note at this point in time that the driver towards the provision of sanitary or changing places toilets is the enhanced access and use of the public environment. That's so where facilities are provided for members of the public, that those sanitary facilities would equally be provided. Other legislation may drive requirements in respect of buildings where members of the public do not have access to the building. Generally speaking, to buildings to which the provisions of changing places toilet would apply, and where sanitary facilities are provided, such changing places facilities are also provided. Equally, under an extension and a material change in use, and indeed in cases in a material alteration, again as set out, having regard to the size and complexity of the building and use, changing places toilets may be required. Article 13 of the building regulations was amended to take into account these characteristic requirements for a changing places toilet. The broad application is set out under Part 0.6G of TGD M. It defines terms such as a relevant building use, so certain classes of use for which a changing places toilet is required, provided that threshold limitations are exceeded. In Part B, Parliament would term them purpose groups. Before getting into the details of the types and sizes of buildings that require a changing places toilet, it's I suppose useful to understand the what's termed as a relevant floor area, a term introduced in respect of TGD M to define the key space thresholds and floor areas that are required before changing places toilet is necessary. It aligns with methods of measurement set out in the building regulations, but it is very specific and bespoke to that of TGD M. So it is here for the purpose of the provision of application of changing places toilet. The calculation of relevant floor area is limited to that of public areas, so not including staff only areas, but does include the internal, everything inside the internal face of the wall. It's, I suppose, in simple parlance, perhaps useful to consider the parts of a building to which public may go without being challenged by a member of staff. If a member of the public has access to the space, well, then it's considered a relevant area. So in the given example, that a retail area will often have back of house or storage areas. It will have retail area that is open and accessible to members of the public, might have access a water closet, which is available to members of the public. If it is accessible, then it is considered as relevant. Moving on to the table 1, the specific uses and building types. A list of very specific, I suppose, relevant uses were defined in respect of the application of the changing places toilets, all agreed through the committee that was established to develop and update this part of TGD M. a number of the definitions are drawn directly from definitions set out in SI 497, so align holistically with the requirements and what we term as uses of buildings. Some of them are related directly, they're all related directly to buildings. However, some of the buildings may operate as part of a campus, but it's important again to remember the building regulations apply to buildings. And for hospitals or schools or third level colleges, they can form part of just a single contiguous structure on a single site, maybe part of an overall site, but the requirements are set out in respect of the building. Offices, there are two key subtypes of office, the public authority office, if you want to call it, and the non-public sector office, which have different characteristics and requirements. There are different provisions in respect to buildings like hotels. Hotels and shopping centres can often include many relevant uses depending on the size and scale of provision of the building. And there are two additional clauses or classes of use specified just for the purpose of the provision of changing places toilets. But I suppose most importantly for provision of equal access, that changing places toilets are specified for certain amenities which are provided in the built environment. We'll go into them in detail. So without going to it in too much detail, I do appreciate there's a lot to take in this morning. Table 1, it does set out the relevant building use. It does set out the size criteria, the essential relevant floor area size criteria that is applicable. So for a hospital, there's a given area of 500 meters squared with a note to the table that the facility should be provided close to the main reception. For certain day centres, excluding creches, preschools or nurseries, so premises where persons receive treatment or care but do not sleep, and the relevant floor area must be greater than 500 meters squared. For places of assembly, there's two key characteristics, either floor area or use. So if there's a facility such as swimming pool or leisure facilities of 500 meters squared, they would provide a changing places toilet. Sports facilities slightly larger at 5,000 meters squared. Roadside service facilities, which may include a service station, 800 meters squared, but the food hall dining area must be greater than 200 meters squared. For schools, the given area is 1,000 meters squared, same for third level colleges. For transport termini, 800 meters squared. For offices, as I said, there's a slight distinction, and for offices in the general, with a gross floor area of 20,000 meters squared, and where sanitary facilities are provided for the public at the main reception, then a CP toilet should be provided. But for offices occupied, maintained, or controlled by a public body, and where the relevant floor area is greater than 250 meters squared, to which members of the public have access, so the main counters of a local authority building or of any other facility where members of the public may approach and occupy or may enter the premises, as long as it's a public body building, then a CP toilet must be provided if sanitary facilities are provided for the public. Shops have a threshold of 2,500 square meters, as do shopping centres, retail car parks at 5,000. Hotels, as I said, can contain a number of distinct uses. They can contain leisure facilities or conference facilities of the type we're in at the moment. They can have a gross floor area, and there would be key characteristic thresholds related to the building. So as I say, if a change of places toilet, if provided in such a building, should be provided having regard to the relevant use, and should be available to all users of the building. Moving on to the public provision of change of places toilets within the public environment, that's where sanitary public facilities are provided by a public body, parks, car parks, beaches, etc. Where there's two or more water closets provided in the building, then a change of places toilet should also be provided. And finally, looking at a cluster of uses in one large scale facility, a building that provides sanitary facilities as part of a collection of smaller buildings for a private outdoor amenity such as zoos, amusement parks and theme parks, so an enclosure to which the public don't generally have access without payment. Such a facility where providing new buildings, new buildings that have a sanitary facility would be required to provide a change of places toilet as well, provided that the facility can take more than 2,500 people, and provided that there's no such similar facility within 250 meters as the crow flies. For the purpose of I suppose explaining and detailing the requirements of when and where and how to apply a change of places toilet, a series of, I suppose, a very simplistic flowchart has been developed for these presentations. Starting out with some very basic questions to be asked in respect of the requirements. Are the works related to a building? As I said earlier, if it's an exempted building, building regs don't apply. So is it a building? Is the building or are the building regulations applicable to the building? If not, change of places toilet is not required. Moving on, are sanitary facilities provided for people other than staff? If not, change of places toilet is not required. And is the building a building listed in table 1? If it's not listed in table 1, again, a change of places toilet is not required by part M, but that's not to say it may not be provided on a voluntary basis. For new buildings and material alterations and changes of use, for new builds and material alteration, we just seek the provisions with respect to table 1. Do they exceed the uses and size thresholds given in table 1? If they do not exceed the use and size, or if it's not a specified use or it does not exceed the size, change of places toilet is not required but may be provided. If they do exceed the use and size thresholds, then change of places toilet must be required under the provisions of TGD M. For material change in use, something's gone slightly wrong with the slides. This should be highlighting both the material changes in use boxes. For material change use, as we are applying the provisions of Article 13, it has to be one of the specified uses to which Part M would apply. So again, day centre, hostel, hotel, or guest building, institutional building, place of assembly, shop, or shopping centre. If it is one of those uses, do they exceed the size requirements? If they do, a CP toilet is required. If they don't, it's not required, but may be provided. So again, in change of use, if use changes from one use to another, and the change in use or the floor area of the change in use exceeds that of the size requirement set out in table 1, then a CP toilet is required. Extensions to buildings are slightly more complicated in that there are 2 key driving criteria for extensions. One, that extension must be of such reasonable size that a CP toilet can be provided, and that the aggregate size of the building when the extension is added is again of such a reasonable size that by itself a CP toilet would be required. So first and foremost, for types 1 through to 12, as listed in table 1, so that would be everything except the public area toilet facilities or toilet facilities in an enclosed amenity. Is it a table 1 building? Is the floor area of the building is the new floor area greater than 25% of the same floor area of the same building relevant use? A simple example of that would be in the case of a school, the relevant area is 1,000 square meters, 25% to be 250 square meters, so it doesn't exceed 250 square meters. Does the combined floor area of the existing building plus the new building exceed that of the relevant floor area given in table 1? So again, in the example of a school or educational facility, it's 1,000 square meters. If the extension is 250 square meters on a 500 square meter building, obviously it's above the 25% threshold, but the total aggregate area is less than 1,000 square meters. So as the building by itself, if built anew, would not require CP toilet, 1 is not required. If the existing building was 900 square meters and there was a 250 square meter extension, then the aggregate area would exceed that of a building built anew. And as it's both a sizable extension and the total building is above the threshold, then a CP toilet would be required. And there's a number of examples given of where a small building with a large extension may not exceed the relevant thresholds, but a large building with a small extension might exceed it. So it really boils down to the provision of floor areas and the numbers. So it also have to exceed the both the extension percentage requirement and the total combined relevant floor area requirement. Again, we are going back to the term relevant floor area rather than total building area. For a table or item 13 extension, is the floor area of the facility being exceeded by more than 25% of the existing building, or are there more than 2 water closets provided? If so, then the change places toilet would be provided as it would be if the building was built as if new. And in the case of a type 14 building, sanitary facilities provided within an enclosed amenity, is the relevant floor area being extended by more than 25% of the existing floor area, or 250 meters squared? And is the proposed building more than 250 square meters from any other building providing similar facilities? And again, if you exceed those requirements, then the CP toilet would be required. If not, it's not a necessity of TGD M, but may be provided. There is guidance given in technical guidance document M, not only for how to or for where and when to provide a CP toilet, but how to provide the CP toilet. So there are general provisions given within the guidance in respect to CP toilets, the specific provisions for changing places toilets. There are specific diagrams now added into TGD M, 27A, B, and C for the layout, the circulation areas, fixtures and fittings of the respective existing buildings. Para 14310 details all the requirements in respect of CP toilet. And there are provisions given in section 2 for existing buildings for where it's not practicable to provide a CP toilet. The general obligation, at least one CP toilet should be provided, having regard to size and use. Where it is provided, it should be suitably located, having regard to the use and operation of the building. A very important, I suppose, provision of the guidance, if we can take a shopping complex, for example, a shopping centre by itself requires a CP toilet. Restaurant facilities above a certain size threshold require a CP toilet, and entertainment facilities such as a cinema would provide or require a CP toilet if it exceeds a certain threshold. All three, I suppose, uses may be found in one contiguous building, a shopping centre. At different times of the day, such a building, morning time, only the shops may be in operation. As we move through the day, shops and restaurants and entertainment facilities might become operable. And as you move on through the evening time, shops might start to close down, with entertainment facilities and restaurants staying open to the later early hours. If a CP toilet is provided in such a building, it should be suitably located that all users of the building can gain access to it. So it might require creative thinking, strategic location of a CP toilet to ensure that it's not in a part of the building which would be closed at one time of the day or another. So careful judgment and choice in respect of its location should be made to ensure that it provides that equal access where provided. It does often come up in respect to the building regulations. We do assume a normal or reasonable level of management in our buildings, but management and ongoing maintenance is not a function or part of the building regulations. They do devolve to other statutory guidance and legislation. However, in respect of CP toilets, the National Disability Authority, who was part of the group that developed the CP toilet provisions, have commenced development of a guidance document for the maintenance and management of such facilities. It'll be published under the Disability Act, but will be created by the NDA. Moving on, and that is a whistle-stop tour of the requirements of the CP toilets of the building regulations. Couldn't leave without saying a few words to the building control regulations, which are also critical and important, ensuring that broad compliance with building regs. The control regs, they again themselves apply generally to new buildings and existing buildings which undergo extension, material alteration, or change of use. They demonstrate through the control processes that the works concerned have been designed and are constructed in compliance with building regs. There are specific exemptions for a disability access certificate being applied in respect of a building. But it's important to note that just as there may be an exemption, it may not be exempt from the requirements of the building regulations. So it's important to have both documents open and have to have regard to both SI 496 and 497 when looking at the provisions of Part M. In 2018, a statutory instrument decoupled the requirements for a disability access certificate from that of the fire safety certificate. So from 2009 to 2018, where Part B and Part M applied, there's near one-to-one relationship or under the regulations in respect of DACs. In 2018, there was slight modifications to the requirements for a disability access certificate. The agricultural building, it's irrespective of number of stories of the building. If Part M applies, still doesn't need a DAC. The garage ancillary to domestic dwelling, again, under Part B requirements or the fire safety certificate requirements, if it's 2 stories, might require a fire cert, but there's no story threshold under the DAC. And there's a specific additional clause in respect of the disability access certificates that a building or part of the building used to enable inspection, repair and maintenance of the fixed plant services and machinery of the building would not require a DAC. That's not to say that a building would not require a DAC by itself. It's also not required for a material alteration to a flat. As I said before, such uses are not called out under the building regulations. There are exempted building requirements under the building control regulations. There are exempted building requirements under the building regulations. They are not the same, and that certain types of building in their entirety are exempted from the control regs. So under Article 20D2C, a building as a domestic garage is fully exempt from the requirements of the building regs, but of the control regs. When we go to the building regulations, for exemption for a Class 1 building, a domestic garage, there are specific limitations to the exemption. So floor area threshold, height, and it must be detached. So if it doesn't exceed, if it doesn't meet one of those requirements, it's not exempt. But exemption from one does not necessarily mean exemption from the other. So as I said, it's useful to have regard to both documents when looking at design requirements. A DAC is required for specific uses, the construction of a new building, including building containing flat, specific material alterations, which align with that of Part B requirements, specific material alterations of shops, offices and industrial buildings, which again align with Part B requirements. However, there is always an overriding clause to which the requirements of Part M of the second schedule apply. So all DACs are applicable in respect of a building to which Part M applies. Same for an extension building by more than 25 square meters and specific material changes in use to which Part M applies. On occupation and completion, there are provisions in respect of the grant of a DAC. So a DAC needs to be granted before the operation, occupation, and use of a building, and certain buildings that require a DAC, if they require a fire safety certificate, would also require a certificate of compliance and completion. There are specific supporting documents to all of this, so it is there's a lot of information to take in, a lot of information contained within the technical guidance documents, but there are a number of documents that have been produced to support the broad application and use of TGD M. So in 2010, an access and use flowchart was provided to support the interpretation of application of Part M and TGD M to existing buildings. The original Building Control Officer Training Manual produced in 2010 is available on the department website. Under Part K, supplementary documents and guidance, there is a supplementary document for stairs, which charts and outlines the overriding requirements in respect of Parts B, M, and K for stairways that tries to, I suppose, clarify the differing requirements for specific stairs. Sometimes there can be confusion in respect of the application of the relevant parts, B, M, or K. Really depends on the type of stairs. Is it just merely a stairs? Is it a stairs with an access requirement? So would it be M and K? Or is it stairs for means of escape and access and have Part K requirements as well? And as he said, the Bringing Back Homes Manual for the Reuse of Existing Buildings document is available on the department website and is quite a useful publication for navigating the building control system and all the various requirements of the building regulations. So in summary, that's a whistle-stop tour of the main of the building control system, principally and objectively the requirements of the building regulations, the particular objectives of Part M, the particular changes to TGD M, and the building control regulations and system of administration and support to the control to the regs. Thank you for your time and attention this morning.